I will now turn to Darryl Li. Darryl Li, who is an anthropologist, legal scholar, and attorney. He is an associate professor at the University of Chicago, as well as a member of the Bar of New York and Illinois. He has conducted research on war, migration, empire, and racialization in the Middle East, South Asia, and the Balkans. Darryl Li is the author of The Universal Enemy, Jihad, Empire, and the Challenge of Solidarity in 2020. He has lived and worked in the Gaza Strip, working for the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem. The title of your presentation is The Most Moral Genocide in the World. You have the floor for 30 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Didier Fassin for the invitation to speak and for gathering us here at the Collège de France, and to thank his entire team for putting this event together. I'd also like to recognize my distinguished colleagues who are speaking today. It's really an honor to be in conversation with all of you. And I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for your time and for your attention. This is working. So today, I will be speaking about the politics of genocide, not the facts of genocide as committed by the State of Israel throughout the Gaza Strip, but rather the global structures that shape the discourses around genocide and how they have shifted over the past 2 years. So it's a reckoning or a mapping of the rise and fall of a particular form of organizing thought and action around mass atrocity in global politics. I'd like to start by talking about two adjacent hilltops on the western outskirts of Jerusalem. Down here is Yad Vashem, the official Holocaust memorial and museum of the State of Israel, a site of pilgrimage for visiting dignitaries and children on school trips alike. I first came here myself in the summer of 2002, after having spent a year living in the Gaza Strip. Like many people, I came because I wanted to better understand the Holocaust and its significance in modern life. But while on my way out of the museum, I noticed that barely a kilometer away, on another hilltop nearby, is Kfar Shaul, an Israeli community that includes a mental health hospital well known for first diagnosing the so-called Jerusalem syndrome, which is a situation whereby awestruck tourists come to believe that they are certain personas or personages from the Bible. Of course, I had also read that Kfar Shaul was built atop the ruins of the Palestinian village of Deir Yassin, site of the most infamous massacre of the 1948 Nakba. Some of the stone houses of Deir Yassin are still standing as part of the Kfar Shaul Mental Health Hospital. So this is a close-up of Yad Vashem. This is Deir Yassin / Kfar Shaul. Two hilltops. One of the best-known sites of commemoration of a mass atrocity in the world, and an uncommemorated site of an actual mass atrocity within living memory nearby. This juxtaposition neatly exemplifies the politics of genocide. For 1948, of course, was not only the year of the Nakba, it was also the year that the international community adopted the treaty that Didier referred to that would enshrine genocide as a crime under international law. In the decades since, genocide has come to be known as the so-called crime of crimes, a superlative form of mass atrocity that should generate unconditional, absolute, and universal opposition. Yet at the same time, the Genocide Convention promulgated a narrow and highly technical legal definition readily open to manipulation by states. It defined genocide in terms of a series of acts committed with a specific intent, namely, quote, to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, unquote. This formulation permits states to enact massive, exterminatory violence under the guise of pursuing legitimate wartime or security aims. It even potentially excludes violence that is explicitly discriminatory. Say, killing people because they belong to a protected group may be distinguished from killing people while intending to destroy the group as such. If you have trouble following what I just said, the problem is not you, it's not me, it's a particular kind of legal argumentation that only a lawyer could appreciate, and I don't mean that as a compliment. It's like, what's that expression? A face that only a mother could love. So these limitations are, of course, not accidental. Many of the states that signed the Genocide Convention had committed mass atrocities of their own. Thus, care was taken to craft a legal definition that could afford states a degree of plausible deniability. Thus, in recent decades, genocide has emerged as both sword and shield. If we return to these two hilltops, Yad Vashem concretizes, quite literally, how the State of Israel has mobilized the memory of the Shoah as a justification for dispossessing the Palestinian people. Violence we can see in the reappropriated stone homes of Deir Yassin just over the valley. According to this logic, European Jews have survived history's greatest crime, and therefore any crime the State of Israel may commit is necessarily trivial in comparison. What this argument lacks in logical rigor, it seeks to compensate for with straight-faced vehemence. Thus, it is the shadow of mass atrocity that allows colonial violence to be not merely permissible, but actually righteous. That is why Israel and its apologists have, for example, long described Israel's military as not merely a moral military, but the most moral army in the world. But this weaponization of Holocaust memory goes far beyond Palestine. It has also been the fulcrum of a universalist project that has buttressed US imperialism for the past few decades. After Yad Vashem, the most famous Shoah monument in the world, arguably, is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. It opened in 1993 as the United States was triumphantly marching into a post-Cold War New World Order. If Yad Vashem is an argument that Zionism is the natural response to the Holocaust, the Washington Holocaust Museum presents the compatible notion that ending the Holocaust is the most self-evident justification for American beneficence. Needless to say, these are ahistorical narratives. They erase the collaboration between the Zionist movement and the Nazi regime. They erase the wartime refusal of the United States to help Jewish refugees trying to escape persecution. They erase the role played by the Soviet Union in defeating Nazism. And of course, they erase the foundational violence of both states, including the genocide and slavery that is the foundation of the United States of America. Nonetheless, from the 1990s onward, there crystallized something we can think of as a sort of genocide universalism, a set of practices, ideas, and institutions mobilized around the supposedly universal argument that genocide is the superlative atrocity, and that stopping it can justify various projects of global governance, including those backstopped by American military omnipotence. This, to be clear, is a rather thin set of ideological commitments. It's not about human rights as such or capitalist notions of freedom. It's merely about the idea that what is to be defended is the non-occurrence of the narrowly defined mass atrocity of genocide. But it was convenient for an era deemed to be post-ideological when the United States was grappling for justifications for its unipolar hegemony in the world in the wake of the end of the Cold War. So let us start in 1993 when the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum had its opening ceremony, and it really interestingly crystallized part of the special relationship tying together Israel and the United States, namely the shared gatekeeping of genocide discourse. The writer Elie Wiesel, an ardent Zionist and one of the world's most well-known Holocaust survivors, at the opening ceremony, he publicly implored the US President Bill Clinton to, quote, do something to stop the bloodshed then unfolding in the Western Balkans in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Media images of emaciated white men behind barbed wire from mass atrocities in Bosnia resonated with a renewed Holocaust consciousness. This was reinforced by numerous 50th anniversary commemorations of World War II and the Holocaust, as embodied in Hollywood films such as Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, which was released the same year. Now, speaking for myself, as a child of Chinese immigrants in the United States who came of age in the 1990s, these televised commemoration rituals were some of my most vivid memories of coming into political consciousness as an assimilating immigrant citizen. They embodied a sort of hopeful new world where the lessons of mass atrocities, the slogan of never again, could hopefully be brought to bear in the service of human rights around the world. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, US elites were in search for rationales to justify their global military domination, and they turned to humanitarian intervention as a way to deal with so-called rogue states that exercised enough sovereignty to defy Washington's diktats, but were not powerful enough to deter military bullying. The 1990s, with its mediatized attention to mass atrocities in Southeast Europe and Central Africa in particular, also witnessed a widespread institutionalization of genocide in international courts, producing jurisprudence that would be weaponized or disregarded according to political expediency. Those suffering in mass atrocities around the world wasted no time in understanding that the Shoah provided the dominant model for legibility to US and European policymakers. Desperate for help in the face of genocidal atrocities, governing elites in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example, actively lobbied Zionist organizations to back their cause in Washington, often invoking Holocaust memory. Hussein Jivar, Bosnia's wartime ambassador to Austria, once told me in an interview about his efforts to win over the famous Nazi hunter, Simon Wiesenthal, with stories about Sarajevo's rich Jewish history. For its part, the more liberal wing of the US Zionist establishment also saw Bosnia and later Kosovo as places where European Muslim populations could be cultivated as moderate alternatives to their darker-skinned co-religionists elsewhere. The noted New York Times columnist and flaccid barometer of elite opinion, Thomas Friedman, for example, highlighted, quote, the fact that America fought for the freedom of Muslims in the Balkans as among the many reasons for which he deemed Arabs to be ungrateful. Now, to be clear, most Balkan Muslims went on to memorialize genocide on their own terms while retaining steadfast solidarity with Palestine. Now, even in its more everyday forms, this constellation of interests influenced the way mass atrocity was memorialized around the world. In 2000, I visited a genocide memorial in Rwanda, in the town of Nyamata, about an hour south of Kigali. There, I came across a room featuring a pile of shoes. This horrifying trope was instantly recognizable. It came straight from the Nazi death camps, where the industrialized killing process methodically stripped victims of their clothes and possessions upon arrival. But it made much less sense in the context of the Rwandan genocide, where murder tended to be more personalized and labor-intensive. Similarly, the first Hollywood film on the Rwandan genocide, Hotel Rwanda, was endlessly spoken of as an African version of Schindler's List. The Holocaust clearly was the template or the baseline against which other genocides were to be measured, or through which they could be recognized. Rwanda's own post-genocide regime was just as adept as its allies in the US and Israel in skillfully exploiting genocide memorialization to build support and silence critics. This genocide decade, if you will, culminated in the 1999 NATO bombing of Yugoslavia in the name of ending mass atrocities in Kosovo. Preventing and punishing genocide became an important part of the toolkit of US imperialism, a rationale for nearly every single US war since. Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons against the Kurdish population in Halabja in 1988 was labeled genocidal and refashioned into a supplementary justification for the invasion of Iraq 15 years later. The specter of genocide was again invoked when NATO bombed Libya, paving the way for the overthrow of Muammar al-Gaddafi. The crusade against the self-declared Islamic State in Iraq and Syria included subplots to save Yazidis and Kurds from genocide. Even short of outright war, the US has wielded genocide accusations in sanctioning adversaries and rivals, such as Myanmar over its treatment of the Rohingya, Sudan over Darfur, and China over Xinjiang. I want to be very clear here. I am not suggesting that legal claims of genocide in these other places are necessarily without merit or unfounded. Rather, I am pointing to an uneven environment saturated by US power, where some legal interpretations are given the air of presumptive plausibility, while others are summarily denied and downplayed. One of the key efforts of genocide universalism was to conscript center-left political formations in the West into imperialist war-making projects, or at least to cow them into silence. This became especially clear after 9/11 and the advent of the so-called War on Terror. For the sections of the ruling class who may have found the War on Terror's jingoism and naked expression of anti-Muslim animus to be unseemly, genocide and mass atrocity prevention provided a far more high-minded basis for military action. Therefore, to be clear, genocide universalism was at most a supplement to US imperialism, but not its primary or most powerful form of justification or logic of organization. So I want to just briefly review this logic of genocide universalism. There's three basic rules. One, genocide is the worst crime possible, and therefore can justify any other form of violence as necessarily less egregious. Two, the Shoah was the paradigmatic case of genocide. Therefore, three, those who can successfully claim the moral authority of the Shoah get to decide which cases count as genocide and what is to be done as a result. These rules and the institutions and practices based on them together seek to naturalize the idea that the United States and Israel enjoy a duopoly over the interpretation of genocide to justify their respective agendas. Israel as the ultimate righteous victim and the United States as the ultimate righteous avenger. As a result, there was, for decades, a very predictable, actually tedious, pattern to how arguments about genocide unfolded. The accusation functioned as a kind of rhetorical weapon of mass destruction in Western public discourse, a moral absolute overriding all other concerns. As with all other such weapons, the powerful have sought to restrict who can possess and effectively use it. In this period, accusing Israel and the United States of genocide, or comparing them to the Nazis, was, in much of the West, a fast track to irrelevance, ridicule, and censure in public life. To accuse the powers that be of genocide incurred the risk of being not merely wrong, but profligate, right? So you'd often hear this argument that, oh, these genocide accusations, they stretch the concept too far, they empty it of any meaning. According to this logic, improper genocide accusations risk robbing the term of the magical effects its utterance is supposed to unlock, basically ruining it for everyone else. In the meantime, Palestinians have long been cast as genocidal merely for breathing, also for breathing, but breathing slogans demanding freedom from the river to the sea, while accusing Israel of genocide has been treated as usurping Jewish patrimony, an act of anti-Semitism in itself. So this universalist project I've been describing for the past few minutes, based on a US-Israeli duopoly on genocide as a rhetorical tool to discipline undesirables, this project has been steadily dismantled over the past 2 years on the ruins of Gaza. The first major blow came in January 2024, when the International Court of Justice in The Hague ruled that a petition brought by South Africa against Israel for violating the Genocide Convention to be plausible. No matter how this case is ultimately decided, even such a preliminary decision shattered the taboo on accusing Israel of genocide. A taboo which, again, was not about debating the applicability of the term, but was about delegitimizing its utterance altogether. Since then, the genocide accusation has only gained further credibility in Western political discourse. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, and the United Nations Commission of Inquiry have all echoed the conclusion that Palestinian human rights groups came to long before them, that the genocide charge is well sustained. I want to stress that none of this was a natural or inevitable reaction to Israel's crimes. After all, history is full of genocides that remain unacknowledged. Rather, it is made possible by the political space opened up by mass mobilization, by Palestinian resistance in all its forms, particularly up and down the Gaza Strip from Beit Hanun to Rafah, and by the solidarity demonstrated in the co-struggle and solidarity demonstrated in the region and around the world, from Sana'a to Beirut to Tehran to the streets of Madrid, Paris, New York, Bogota, Johannesburg, and elsewhere. But we must acknowledge that the demise of genocide universalism is not necessarily a victory for justice either. For as Israel's ability to deny and distract from charges of genocide has become weaker, we are witnessing an even more disturbing phenomenon, a dismantling of support for the genocide norm altogether. Simply put, it seems that Israel and the United States have decided that if they cannot control the discourse on genocide, then perhaps the concept is outliving its usefulness. On September 4th, the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum, the oldest such museum in the United States, posted an image on Instagram of 6 forearms of different skin tones interlinked, each hand on the wrist of another. The palest wrist has a number written on it, clearly a reference to the practice of tattooing numbers on the wrists of Jews and others held in the Nazi concentration camps. A large caption loudly declared, "Never again" can't only mean never again for Jews. The implication was clear. European Jews and darker-skinned peoples have a shared interest in opposing genocide. Before October 7th, 2023, this would have been an entirely unremarkable example of genocide universalism. The Shoah is the paradigmatic example of genocide, one to which other genocides must refer as a model for comparison and legitimation. But the museum quickly faced backlash from other Zionists who accused them of making a coded critique of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Within days, the offending social media post was gone. In its place was a groveling apology written in the kind of institutional public relations speak that the right has ridiculed as cancel culture. In part, the new message read, "We recently posted an item on social media that was intended to promote inclusivity and community that was easily open to misinterpretation by some to be a political statement reflecting the ongoing situation in the Middle East. That was not our intent. It has been removed to avoid any further confusion. We promise to do better, and we will ensure that posts in the future are more thoughtfully designed and thoroughly vetted." What is notable about this incident is not the claim that there's some group of people who are Jews who think that the Holocaust is the only genocide or the most important genocide. Rather, what is striking here is the renunciation of a universalist project. The gatekeepers of genocide have lost confidence in their ability to make conclusive determinations about which atrocities are deserving of the label and which ones are not. The incident is a tacit admission that when the Holocaust Museum Los Angeles, that when their audience hears the word genocide, that they are less likely to think first of the Holocaust than they are of Gaza. So what kinds of voices were those that convinced the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles to delete its social media post? To further illustrate the implosion of genocide universalism that we are witnessing in real time, I want to draw attention to another remarkable act of political speech. Allow me to, well, some of you may have already been introduced, but allow me to introduce you to Sarah Hurwitz, who recently drew attention for remarks she made at a conference of US Jewish organizations in Washington. I threw some French subtitles on. They're not that great, so interpreter friends, please help me out.
And, you know, I think, unfortunately, the very smart, bet that we made on Holocaust education to serve as anti-Semitism education, in this new media environment, I think that is beginning to break down a little bit. Because, you know, Holocaust education is absolutely essential. But I think it may be confusing some of our young people about anti-Semitism because they learn about big, strong Nazis hurting weak, emaciated Jews. And they think, oh, anti-Semitism is like anti-Black racism, right? Powerful white people against powerless Black people. So when on TikTok all day long they see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, it's not surprising that they think, oh, I know, the lesson of the Holocaust is you fight Israel. You fight the big, powerful people hurting the weak people.
Okay. Hurwitz is very much in the mainstream of American liberalism, and liberal Zionism in particular. She is a two-time Harvard graduate and has worked as a speechwriter for several Democratic Party presidential candidates, including Al Gore, John Kerry, and Hillary Clinton. She is best known for having worked as a speechwriter for Barack Obama, and for many years as the head speechwriter for Michelle Obama. She's the kind of person whose views on Zionism have long been considered common sense in American public life. She is not an outlier. For Hurwitz, Holocaust education, a linchpin in genocide universalism, has not only worked, it has worked all too well. Now, her concern is primarily internal to Jewish communities. Her comments, they come in the context of complaining about how younger generations of American Jews are becoming disaffected with Israel and Zionism. And in a banal sense, her point is not unfounded, right? So I too can attest to the success of this universalist project, whereby even a child of Chinese immigrants can be so moved by Holocaust stories that they learned in school that they set out on a path that ultimately leads to opposing oppression elsewhere, even in Palestine. But while the Holocaust Museum Los Angeles, while its statement suggests that Jews are not under an obligation to oppose genocide against other peoples, Hurwitz seems to be saying something even more disturbing. Now, notice that she refers to the bet that we made on Holocaust education to serve as anti-Semitism investigation. That's the quote. What is the nature of the wager to which she's referring, this bet that they made? After all, insofar as the Holocaust was perhaps the single most important episode of anti-Semitic violence ever, Holocaust education would seem to serve as education about anti-Semitism by definition. But what Hurwitz means by anti-Semitism in education is much more akin to simply indoctrination for Zionism. For Hurwitz, if Holocaust education does not further the goals of Zionism, then Holocaust education is part of the problem. I'd like to end my remarks today with a final monument to mass atrocity. It's not as official as Yad Vashem or as the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, but unlike Deir Yassin, its authors have no interest in hiding it. In fact, they likely intended it to be visible, even from outer space. This is my old neighborhood, Ramal, once a relatively affluent area in the city of Gaza. The space that you see here, that was marked by the Star of David, was marked sometime in early 2024, most likely etched into the earth by the treads of military vehicles during the Israeli army's first incursion into that area during the genocide. In 2001, I lived for 6 months in a small apartment on a nearby street named for Folke Bernadotte, the Swedish diplomat who helped rescue thousands of Jews from the Nazis during World War II and was later sent as the United Nations mediator in Palestine, only to be assassinated by Zionist militia. I used to walk by this park every day. I remember vividly the landmarks nearby. I hope there are people in this room who know this area as well. I remember the Tarazi gas station, the Al-Katiba Mosque, and the Jawaharlal Nehru Library of the Al-Azhar University of Gaza. When I shared this image on social media, there were basically two types of reactions, expressed in roughly equal proportion. The first was mockery, satisfaction, even delight. The Star of David was an expression of Jewish triumph in the face of anti-Semitism, and that this act of vandalism was both inevitable and praiseworthy, or in internet speak, FAFO, fuck around and find out. The other was horror and revulsion, typically manifested in the observation that the Star of David is now akin to a swastika. I take this sentiment to mean that any symbol, notwithstanding its original meaning, can, in a different context, be turned into a means to terrorize others and express contempt for them. This is how the swastika evolved from a symbol in Hindu iconography to become widely associated with Nazism. It's also how the Christian cross, when set afire by the Ku Klux Klan, has become a symbol of white supremacy. Closely related to this observation is an argument one sometimes hears, that Israel was born as a response to Nazism, and now it is ironically betraying its lofty principles and acting like the Nazis themselves. This mode of sympathetic lamentation flatters Zionism with the possibility of redemption and erases its colonial nature and its colonial context. The reality is something quite different. In Western public debate for the past 75 years, Nazism has been the standard for what is inimitably unacceptable. It has been the evil to which all other evils are necessarily compared. For the coming generations, it is quite possible that the evil to which all other evils are compared will no longer be Nazism, but rather Zionism. At stake is not the propriety or the rectitude of comparisons to the Nazis, but rather their relevance or their resonance. This is not because of any kind of objective comparative measurement in the gravity of crimes or mass atrocities, as if such a grotesque accounting were possible. Rather, if this happens, it will be because Nazism itself will have been rehabilitated by a resurgent right wing. It will be because the liberal center that has relied on Nazism as the great evil justifying all other evils will have totally immolated its own credibility thanks to its support for genocide in Gaza and elsewhere, I should add. I must add that this scenario that I'm sketching is a relatively optimistic one, for it implies at least the possibility of an ongoing confrontation between fascism and anti-fascism. The outcome of such a struggle would be far from clear. It could easily be one in which fascism triumphs, which would mean that, among other things, that genocide would no longer be considered an atrocity at all, but would simply become an openly accepted way of doing politics and of celebrating politics. Either way, the State of Israel, in the meantime, I should say, will continue to combine colonial violence with the anxiety over the illegitimacy of that violence in an ostensibly post-colonial world. As it loses legitimacy throughout the world, it will become only more enmeshed in its own certitude and self-righteousness. Through the rise and fall of genocide universalism, the logic on the ground has endured. The violence that cannot be hidden must be justified. The violence that cannot be justified must be celebrated. If Israel is to commit genocide, this logic goes, then that genocide must necessarily be what is right. So right that it must be, indeed, the most moral genocide in the world. Thank you.